Hello.
And welcome to Larry's Library.
I think they're mocking me with that now. I don't know. Hello, welcome to Larry's Library. Sorry I missed last night. I had a emergency at home I had to deal with. All right, boys, no fighting behind me. And so I couldn't read last night. So here we are today, starting with chapters 20 and 21 of Pinocchio, chapter 20. Liberated from prison, he starts to return to the fairy's house, but on the road he meets with a horrible serpent, and afterwards he is caught in a trap. Because yes, our hero Pinocchio was finally let out of prison and for having his money stolen. That's kind of weird. But anyway, he's in prison. But you can imagine Pinocchio's joy when he found himself free. Without stopping to take breath, he immediately left the town and took the road that led to the fairy's house. On account of the rainy weather, the road had become a marsh into which he sank knee-deep. But the puppet would not give in. Tormented by the desire of seeing his father and his little sister with blue hair again, he ran and leapt like a greyhound. And as he ran, he was splashed with mud from head to foot. And he said to himself as he went along, "How many misfortunes have happened to me, and I deserve them, for I am an obstinate, passionate puppet. I am always bent upon having my own way, without listening to those who wish me well, and who have 1,000 times more sense than I have. But from this time forth I have determined to change and to become orderly and obedient. For at last I have seen that disobedient boys come to no good and gain nothing. And will my papa have waited for me? Shall I find him at the fairy's house? Poor man! It is so long since I last saw him. I am dying to embrace him and to cover him with kisses. And will the fairy forgive me my bad conduct to her? To think of all the kindness and loving care I received from her. To think that if I am now alive, I owe it to her. Would it be possible to find a more ungrateful boy, or one with less heart than I have?" Whilst he was saying this, he stopped suddenly, frightened to death, and made 4 steps backwards. What had he seen? He had seen an immense serpent stretched across the road. Its skin was green. It had red eyes and a pointed tail that was smoking like a chimney. It would be impossible to imagine the puppet's terror. He walked away to a safe distance, and sitting down on a heap of stones, waited until the serpent should have gone about its business and had left the road clear. He waited an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. But the serpent was always there, and even from a distance he could see the red light of his fiery eyes and the column of smoke that ascended from the end of his tail. At last Pinocchio, trying to feel courageous, approached to within a few steps and said to the serpent in a little soft, insinuating voice, "Excuse me, Sir Serpent, but would you be so good as to move a little to one side, just enough to allow me to pass?" He might as well have spoken to the wall. Nobody moved. He began again in the same soft voice. "You must know, Sir Serpent, that I am on my way home, where my father is waiting for me, and it is such a long time since I saw him last. Will you therefore allow me to continue my road?" He waited for a sign in answer to this request, but there was none. In fact, the serpent, who up to that moment had been sprightly and full of life, became motionless and almost rigid. He shut his eyes, and his tail ceased smoking. "Can he really be dead?" said Pinocchio, rubbing his hands with delight, and he determined to jump over him and reach the other side of the road. But just as he was going to leap, the serpent raised himself suddenly on end, like a spring set in motion, and the puppet, drawing back in his terror, caught his feet and fell to the ground. And he fell so awkwardly that his head stuck in the mud and his legs went into the air. See the picture? There's a picture. See the picture? See the picture? See the picture? There. At the sight of the puppet, kicking violently with his head in the mud, the serpent went into convulsions of laughter, and he laughed and laughed and laughed, until from the violence of his laughter he broke a blood vessel in his chest and died. And that time he was really dead. Pinocchio then set off running in hopes that he should reach the fairy's house before dark. But before long he began to suffer so dreadfully from hunger that he could not bear it, and he jumped into a field by the wayside, intending to pick some bunches of muscatel grapes. Oh, that he had never done it. He had scarcely reached the vines when crack! His legs were caught between two cutting iron bars, and he became so giddy with pain that stars of every color danced before his eyes. The poor puppet had been taken in a trap put there to capture some big polecats who were the scourge of the poultry yards in the neighborhood. Chapter 21. Pinocchio was taken by a peasant who obliges him to fill the place of his watchdog in the poultry yard. Pinocchio, as you can imagine, began to cry and scream, but his tears and groans were useless, for there was not a house to be seen, and not a living soul passed down the road. At last night came on. Partly from the pain of the trap that cut his legs, and a little from fear at finding himself alone in the dark in the midst of the fields, the puppet was on the point of fainting. Just at that moment he saw a firefly flitting over his head. He called to it and said, "Oh, little firefly, will you have pity on me and liberate me from this poor torture?" "Poor boy," said the firefly, stopping and looking at him with compassion. "But how could your legs have been caught by those sharp irons?" "I came into the field to pick 2 bunches of these muscatel grapes and..." "But were the grapes yours?" "No." "And then who taught you to carry off other people's property?" "I was so hungry." "Hunger, my boy, is not a good reason for appropriating what does not belong to us." That is true, said Pinocchio, crying. "I will never do it again." At this moment their conversation was interrupted by a slight sound of approaching footsteps. It was the owner of the field coming on tiptoe to see if one of the polecats that ate his chickens during the night had been caught in his trap. His astonishment was great when, having brought out his lantern from under his coat, he perceived that instead of a polecat, a boy had been taken. "Ah, little thief," said the angry peasant, "then it is you who carry off my chickens." "No, it is not I, indeed, it is not I," cried Pinocchio, sobbing. "I only came into the field to take 2 bunches of grapes." "He who steals grapes is quite capable of stealing chickens. Leave it to me. I will give you a lesson that you will not forget in a hurry." Opening the trap, he seized the puppet by the collar and carried him to his house as if he had been a young lamb. When he reached the yard in front of the house, he threw him roughly on the ground, and putting his foot on his neck, he said to him, "It is late, and I want to go to bed. We will settle our accounts tomorrow. In the meanwhile, as the dog who kept guard at night died today, you shall take his place at once. You shall be my watchdog." And taking a great collar covered with brass knobs, he strapped it tightly round his throat that he might not be able to draw his head out of it. A heavy chain attached to the collar was fastened to the wall. "If it should rain tonight," he then said to him, "you can go and lie down in the kennel. The straw that has served as a bed for my poor dog for the last 4 years is still there. If, unfortunately, robbers should come, remember to keep your ears pricked and to bark." After giving him this last injunction, the man went into the house, shut the door, and put up the chain. Poor Pinocchio remained lying on the ground, more dead than alive from the effects of cold, hunger, and fear. From time to time he put his hands angrily to the collar that tightened his throat and said, crying, "It serves me right. Decidedly, it serves me right. I was determined to be a vagabond and a good-for-nothing. I would listen to bad companions, and that is why I always meet with misfortunes. If I had been a good little boy, as many are, if I had been willing to learn and to work, if I had remained at home with my poor papa, I should not now be in the midst of the fields and obliged to be the watchdog to a peasant's house. Oh, if I could be born again! But now it is too late, and I must have patience." Relieved by this little outburst, which came straight from his heart, he went into the dog kennel and fell asleep. And we will end our reading today. The next chapter, it would be, I guess, 22, is Pinocchio discovers the robbers, and as a reward for his fidelity is set at liberty. Ooh, something's going to work out in his favor, we hope. Thank you very much. This has been Larry's Library. Enjoy it. Let me know what you think. Put in a comment.
How? Bye.
How is Pinocchio?